Welcome back to Proximmer, everybody. And today we're going to be doing a competitive Alaitoc list spotlight that I've been running for the past couple weeks. And I call this list Triple Shroud Runners. So Shroud Runners have kind of come to prominence within the community in the last, really since the drop of the Nephilim update, because of their comparison with Wind Runners with scatter lasers. And the fact that Wind Runners with scatter lasers actually got a points increase up to 30 points per model. And Shroud Runners compare very well to Wind Runners with scatter lasers now, especially with the drop of some of the new codexes. Scatter lasers have become much more prominent and much more powerful against those factions and in competitive play in general. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So in this video, we're going to be doing a quick review of the Alaitoc Craftworld's Army bonus, Relic, Stratagem, and Warlord trait. We're going to be taking a look at the units in the Triple Shroud Runner list that I've been piloting over the past couple weeks. We're going to be analyzing and discussing the list and each unit's role. And lastly, we're going to be discussing the list's strengths and, of course, its weaknesses and downfalls. So first up is the Fieldcraft Army bonus. So this is one of the more powerful army bonuses. It gives every single unit light cover against range attacks outside of 12 inches. And this is very effective, and it also counts as giving the entire army cover. So any bonuses that units get while in cover will also apply. Every unit of infantry or jet bike also will get dense cover if they are in a terrain feature and outside of 12 inches of enemy units, of course against range attacks. This is very powerful for allowing our jet bike units and our infantry units to be harder to kill at range. And our infantry units also ignore any movement modifiers. So they're harder to catch in melee, they can move through terrain easier, and in general, they just can't be debuffed when it comes to their movement speed or their advances, which can really help them get to the objectives they need to earlier in the game, or quite frankly, later in the game when you need them on certain objectives to score and win the game. Their special stratagem is Pathfinder Ambush, basically allows a ranger unit to shoot enemy reinforcements coming in. You can also use this to place a ranger unit from strategic reserve within 18 inches of incoming enemy reinforcements. So this can provide a screen for units that your opponent didn't think were screened. This can be a little bit of a mind game for your opponent. If you keep a unit of rangers in strategic reserve, if your opponent comes in somewhere and has other reinforcements, as long as they're outside of 18 inches, within 18 inches of the incoming enemy reinforcements, you can place them as a screening unit that can deny the enemy certain things, charges, etc. Which actually, believe it or not, is going to be extremely important against the new Demons Codex, because the new Demons Codex is going to have a lot of deep striking units who can potentially deep strike closer than 9 inches away from your units. So as long as they're 9 inches away from that enemy unit, they can be placed and used as a screen that your opponent didn't expect. As for their relic, the Shift Shroud of Endless Air, the bearer cannot be targeted by range attacks outside of 12 inches. I think this is very good for an Alaitoc infantry model on a Farseer, something like that. Something that's going to stay in the backfield and basically just can't be targeted. It's also very good, believe it or not, on infantry characters that you plan on jumping up into the enemy deployment zone later in the game. It's a great way to sneak an enemy character into an enemy deployment zone to score on secondaries and so forth. So it can be used in some interesting ways. However, do be careful with it. Enemies can still shoot while within 12 inches. So if they have fast elements in their army and you separate your character from the rest of your forces, they're not going to benefit from Lookout Sir, and they're probably going to still die. So you do want to be careful with this ability in general. And Master of Ambush is their Warlord trait, which allows you to select one core unit within 9 inches of the Warlord, and that unit can shoot and make actions in the same turn, essentially turning that unit into a unit of Dire Avengers. So things like Rangers can still perform actions and shoot, which can be very useful. Also, you can redeploy one Ranger unit before the start of the battle, so it also gives you a little more flexibility with redeployment. And lastly, not Alaitoc specific, but very key and important to this matchup, is the Resonator Shard. So it allows your support weapons to reroll hits when enemy units are within 12 inches of Resonator Shard units. Resonator Shard units are, in fact, Rangers. So I believe so far it's only just Rangers. So that means it's not Shroud Runners, unfortunately, because Shroud Runners do not, I believe, have the Ranger keyword, but they do have the Outcast keyword. So they can, and also Shroud Runners have their own special stratagem. So it doesn't really work with Shroud Runners because, and again, the only unit with the keyword Resonator Shard is actually just regular Rangers. So unfortunately, it can only be used with them, but Alaitoc is going to have a lot of Rangers, and you can easily get these rerolls on your support weapons, which are key to the first few turns of your success using these weapons. Because it basically allows you to have guide on a unit that normally cannot get guide because they are not core. So that's going to be extremely useful in this matchup, and we'll go ahead and talk about that a little more when we get into the list. So this is going to be a 2,000 point Alaitoc list that I'm talking about, and basically this list has 3 tenets to it that make it very effective. It's really high speed, its ability to control the board and control enemy units, movement, and also the sustained damage it can inflict over time against enemy units that basically don't have a chance of catching them. And getting right into the list, this is going to be, again, a 2K battalion of Alaitoc. It's a strike force game, and the starting command points is 6 with the Nephilim changes. For HQ, we have a Autarch Skyrunner with a laser lance. This Autarch is going to be really influential because many of you might be thinking, well, why not just another Farseer? However, the Autarch is actually mathematically better with the setup that we have, and it allows us another unit that can tie up enemy units in close combat and be really effective on the charge. In fact, an Autarch Skyrunner, with its ability to allow friendly units, core units, within 6 inches to reroll ones to hit, is more effective with Shroud Runners than a single guide is if you have multiple units. So that's something to think about. The Autarch is actually the superior choice here. We also have a Farseer Skyrunner with Guide and Doom, although I highly considered taking out Guide and replacing it for Fortune or Fateful Divergence, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Guide seems like one of the best powers, obviously, in the game, but with the particular setup that we have in this list, it's actually not as effective as usual. And that Farseer has the Warlord trait Seer of the Shifting Vector in order to get some extra command points. And lastly, we have a Farseer Skyrunner with Focus Will and Ghost Walk. Ghost Walk being able to combine with the assault elements of your army, your Autarch, or your Wraith Blades, which we'll talk about in a second, and their role. And this allows them to basically get the charge out of reserve. And also, the Focus Will Psychic Power allows your Farseer Skyrunner with Guide and Doom to get their powers off easier, or your Farseer Skyrunner with Focus Will to get their Ghost Walk off easier if they need to. For troops, we have 5 Ranger units. Now, only one of them has the Wire Weave Nets, and that is because only one of them is going to be close to enemy units to activate that first or second turn Resonator Shard ability. So the reason why I did this is because Wire Weave Nets are a little bit expensive, and we don't need them on every Ranger unit. We only need it really on the forward deploying Ranger unit that we're going to use to either block enemy movement or get into a position to use the Resonator Shard to basically provide a speed bump to enemy units. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, well, Proxy Hammer, why not put the Wire Weave Nets on all the Rangers, because they all technically can be used as speed bumps. That is true, but in an Alaitoc list, we're really going to need these Rangers to help screen out our more vulnerable elements to deep striking units. So they're going to be needing to deploy further back, usually, to be able to protect those units. And as a result, the Wire Weave Nets that I've found basically don't have as much of an effect when you're using them to screen against deep strikers and using them in the backfield. They don't really have that much of an effect. So I've chosen to only go with them on one unit. However, I'm open to tweaks. If the new Demon Codex comes out and assault-based demon armies are really in vogue, I'll definitely consider taking more wire review nets. But for now, in the current state of the game, I decided to just go with the one wire review net. And of course, having an extra ranger unit is really going to help you with your secondary objectives and also just your objectives in general, being able to cover more area on the board so that you can score and keep up with enemy units and their abilities to score points on secondary objectives. For our elite slot, we have the Warlock Skyrunner with Quicken and Restrain. We have a Warlock Skyrunner with Protect and Jinx, and a Warlock Skyrunner with Conceal and Reveal. We also have a single Warlock with Embolden and Horrify, which stays back with the ground elements of our forces. So the reason for these Warlocks is to both debuff enemy units and in some circumstances buff our own units. This is going to give us not only more damage, but it's going to make it very hard for enemy units to engage in close combat as well as move around the battlefield. Restrain is especially effective at keeping units slow and keeping units either off objectives or outside of their ability to score. Any actions units perform are going to be basically obsolete with the Restrain ability, and essentially enemy units just really aren't going to be able to charge you with when they're under this effect. Especially in combination with the wire weave grenades that the Shroud Runners have. Of course, we have Jinx and Protect. This helps us survive better, but also Jinx is really good at debuffing enemy armor. We have the Warlock Skyrunner with Conceal and Reveal to help, again, get rid of enemy cover saves and also potentially use that on your own units to give them light cover, which isn't really as needed. But it also does allow you to cast it on a unit that you think enemy units will move within 12 of. So for example, the Alaitoc army bonus only gives you light cover outside of 12 inches. So if you know that an enemy unit is going to land within 9 inches of your unit, you can easily cast Conceal on them to still give them their cover save. This is very effective on things like Shroud Runners, which if you think somebody's going to deep strike within 9 inches of them, Conceal can be very useful for actually being able to basically still give them the benefits of cover. So very important there. And lastly, we have 5 Wraith Blades with Ghost Axe and Force Shield. Now, this may seem like an odd inclusion, but Wraith Blades are still counted as infantry, so they benefit from all the army bonuses. They get -1 as long as they're in a terrain feature to hit outside of 12 inches against range attacks. They also get +1 armor from having light cover. Combine this with things like Protect, potentially, and you could have a really tough unit that is really durable against range attacks. But not only that, Wraith Blades can hold up strong enemy units turn after turn after turn. And I think especially with the new Demons Codex, with all the chariots that they have and all the mobility that they have, a unit of Wraith Blades being able to hold up enemy units for several turns while you disengage and move away from those units is going to be very important. And of course, we're going to deploy these via the Webway Strike, but the thing is, we could also deploy them on the battlefield. They're durable enough at range to justify doing that, to be used as a screening unit as well. So it's really up to you whether you use them in reserve or just set up normally. I think against assault armies that don't have a lot of shooting, setting them up normally could be a great advantage, especially against quick armies that are going to assault you turn 2, which are going to be Chaos Demons, by the way. They're going to assault you turn 2, so you have to be prepared for that. So Wraith Blades are a really good inclusion in this list because not only do they benefit a lot from the different traits of Alaitoc, but they're extremely durable and they can hold up enemy units for turn after turn after turn. And not for nothing, but not being able to be debuffed by movement effects is also really helpful on them because they are kind of slow. And here we come to the mainstay of this list. The main reason that I thought of writing up this list was because of the Shroud Runners. So the Shroud Runners, we're going to have 3 units of 5. We're going to cap them out at the max. They are extremely effective when used in conjunction to basically take out anything. And just to give you an example, this is 15 sniper shots And this is also, believe it or not, 90 scatter laser shots. 90. Now, the reason why I told you earlier that we took the Autarch instead of the Farseer is because the Autarch is going to stick around these guys as a counter-assault unit. Yes, that's right. We need a fast element to the army that can also provide counter-assault ability. There's going to be several units that can actually assault these guys out of reserve and things like that and engage these guys. So sometimes those wire weave nets are just not going to be enough, or wire weave grenades are just not going to be enough to prevent charges. The Autarch not only gives them rerolls of 1 to hit, which by the way, these guys hit on 2+, so you're going to be rerolling all your attacks usually. Not only are you going to be rerolling all your hits, but the Autarch is going to be able to heroically intervene in assaults and clear out assaulting units before they have the chance to strike you down. So this is our main infantry sweeper of the list, and to be honest with you, I've crunched the numbers and done the math and rolled against heavier stuff too in the later game. When used together with the proper debuffs, this unit can absolutely shred anything. Or, well, I should say these 3 units. I had a game actually where they were shooting at something like a Predator tank, and I can't remember whether it had last cannons or the autocannon variant. I just can't remember which one it was. But these guys absolutely shredded that vehicle. We put Jinx on the vehicle, and these guys just absolutely dominated it. And of course, we had a couple of other debuffs as well. But even so, very good unit at sweeping out enemy infantry, and going to be very effective against the new Demon Codex, especially with the new changes to their demonic save. These guys are going to absolutely sweep away anything that is not a Nurgle unit or a Tzeentch unit. And honestly, Tzeentch and Nurgle units are still going to just take a lot of attritional damage from these guys because they have so many shots, and because obviously forcing more saves on enemy units with low toughness, like Tzeentch units, are typically going to be very effective. And just think about this for a second. Pink Horrors, which I believe right now are toughness 3, but they have a 3+ invul against shoot, or well, not really an invul save. They have a 3+ demonic save against shooting in the new Demon Codex. Any big blob of those, even taking hits from 2 of these units, is probably going to suffer greatly. You're going to get about 90 shots total with these guys, hitting on 2+ with rerolls, wounding on 2+ against toughness 3 units, possibly with rerolls as well if you have Doom on them, and that's going to be an insane amount of saves. So just think about that for a second, how much potential this unit truly has when used together, especially with an Autarch. And these guys have a relatively low profile because they're only 5 model units. So essentially you can run around with 3 of these guys and an Autarch together and not really suffer the negative effects from blast weapons or have any line of sight issues. If you're playing on a regular board with regular line of sight blocking terrain or obscuring terrain, these guys should be able to hide relatively well behind those pieces of terrain. And even so, when they're in a terrain feature at all, they get -1 to hit, they get +2 to their armor saves, so these guys are pretty durable at range, and they have 3 wounds apiece as well. And lastly, we have our heavy support element of D-Cannon. So these D-Cannons are primarily just for anti-tank hunting and area denial. It helps your army be able to deal with tanks when heavy stuff enters your deployment zone. Now, yes, these guys are not going to be able to deal with any long-range vehicles in the backfield. That's not going to be their job. Their job is to protect you from big things like chaos demons, that demonic monsters, bloodthirsters, basically big demons and big tanks and stuff like that. So deep striking dreadnoughts, stuff of that nature. These guys are going to be able to not only dominate those types of units, but also be able to remain hidden, which is really great because it denies your enemy the chance to take out your anti-tank elements early on in the game. And I think especially with all the deep striking that demons are going to be doing, these guys combined with the forewarned ability are going to be absolutely crucial in ensuring that your opponent really can't deploy too close to your army without fear of getting blasted off the table before they even have the chance to strike. So this is going to be a very effective thing. Now, from what I've heard, the greater demons of the Chaos Demon Codex have a special rule where they can't lose more than 3 models in a single phase. So this is going to be a little bit tough for us to deal with in general, but things like Bloodthirsters are going to be extremely, extremely expensive. And if we screen our units out properly with Rangers, Bloodthirsters are just not going to be that big of a deal. We're just going to pick them apart at range. We're going to end up destroying them. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Again, it does sound scary, but thankfully this list has a lot of elements that can do damage in different phases of the game. So we shouldn't have to worry too much about that. So as for the strengths and weaknesses of this unit has a lot of strengths. It's fast and very hard to pin down. Nothing in the list can be affected by any movement debuffs. This is insane. This means that you can ride circles around your opponents and even through terrain. You can oftentimes lure enemy units into a terrain feature in which they'll never really get out effectively, whereas you will easily escape it. They're also great at slowing down enemy units and evading combat through their stratagems and special abilities, as well as their psychic powers that we use in this list, and they're deceptively hard-hitting. And what I mean by that is a lot of the weapons in the list don't really seem that powerful, but when used in mass are extremely effective at whittling down units and destroying them outright in certain cases with the right debuffs and buffs. The scatter lasers may not look like a very powerful weapon on paper, but as soon as you tell your opponent how many shots they have and how many saves your opponent is going to have to make after shooting with all the debuffs, it's going to start to make your opponent sweat and think differently about these units. So again, deceptively hard-hitting, very fast and hard to pin down, and great at slowing down enemies and evading close combat. Now, their weaknesses are many, and the reason why is because they are weak to ignores cover weapons and attacks. So unfortunately, anything that ignores cover is going to get around a large part of our survivability aspect at range. A lot of enemy units have the ability to ignore cover, unfortunately, so that's a strike against it. They also have no long-range anti-tank, which is unfortunate because some things can only be killed with anti-tank. However, at range, again, I would put forward the proposition that the Sky Runners, the Warlocks that is, combined with the Shroud Runners, can easily debuff a long-range anti-tank unit and put that thing out of commission if coordinated correctly. So in a previous video, I did an example of a coordinated strike. Shroud Runners can be a part of something like this to great effect. Also, there's really no great guide targets in the list, and I have guide in the list. So maybe Fortune or Fateful Divergence would be the better power when included in this list. I kind of have a habit, maybe it's a little bit of an OCD thing, of basically always including guide, even though sometimes it's not the optimal psychic power. So that's something I'll probably end up switching out eventually to Fortune, or perhaps Fateful Divergence. Fortune to give the Wraith Blades a little bit more staying power in close combat, and Fateful Divergence to get a little extra command points out of it. So in conclusion, I think Alaitoc has a lot of potential to be quite effective in the competitive scene due to their synergy with some of our best answers to the strongest armies out there, which are, right, the new Chaos Demons Codex and stuff like that, and Tyranids as well. Shroud Runners and D-Cannons are absolutely super effective against these types of opponents. And while I have had success with this list in the games that I've played, the real test is going to be when the new Chaos Demons Codex comes out. Which, I have to be honest, on paper, the matchup looks extremely favorable to Craftworld Eldar. And when I say extremely favorable, I mean, if you build your Craftworld army Eldar in a certain way, Chaos Demon armies are going to be very ill-equipped to deal with you. Your units are very fast. You have a lot of long-range anti-infantry firepower that can be buffed. And I really think that also the amount of screening potential we have is quite good. Also, something that I failed to mention earlier was we have a lot of mortal wound potential within the army. Between the Ranger, Shroud Runner, and D-Cannon units, there's a lot of potential for mortal wounds. And honestly, having 2 Farseers and all those Warlocks with the potential of using Smite is also a very effective strategy. Again, we have 4 Warlocks and 2 Farseers. That's 6 Psychers that can potentially use Smite. Not all of them might get off, but that's a lot of mortal wounds. So if you really need something dead in the psychic phase, you have that Bloodthirster staring you down, you can do damage with, if the Bloodthirster decides to deep strike in, you can do damage with Forewarned, and then during your turn, you can do 3 wounds to it during your psychic phase, 3 wounds to it during your shooting phase, and 3 wounds to it during your assault phase. That's going to be a lot of heavy damage that a Bloodthirster is not going to be able to get back from, because as soon as that Bloodthirster destroys whatever screening unit you put in the way, it's going to go down the very next turn. So again, Bloodthirster sounds really scary, but when you really think about it, a really expensive model like a Bloodthirster really just isn't going to be that effective against this type of list. It's really not going to be able to catch a lot of things in close combat either. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. And again, I really like the Alaitoc Craftworld. I think it does have the potential to be very competitive. So for you Alaitoc players out there who are playing an army that is not really considered the tip top of the iceberg at the moment competitively, I give a shout out to you. Awesome job for continuing to play them. I think they're fantastic, and I think they have the potential to be one of the best competitive Craftworlds in our codex. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I'll see you guys next time. Leave a comment in the comment section and give me a few of your thoughts on the list. Also, what tweaks that you would make to it. And maybe just talk a little bit of strategy, of list building, and stuff like that. That would be very welcome. All right, everybody. Peace out. See you later. Have a good one.